Oh boy, the Glasgow, Scotland fans sure got a show here, didn't they? I'm Joe Renton with the Retro Review of World Wrestling All-Stars, the Retribution 2002 pay-per-view from December 6, 2002. My fucking goodness, there's a lot to unpack here. This is basically like the last remnants of the worst parts of WCW, the last year of WCW, and Jeff Jarrett continuing to break guitars and not drawing a goddamn dime. I'd like to thank Mike Graham, rest in peace Mike Graham, for coming up with that very, very great line that really can apply to a lot of Jeff Jarrett's career. Because while he was a great mid-carder, maybe even a great upper mid-carder, he was never a great main eventer. Anytime he was a world champion, it was fucking embarrassing. So yeah, they were at the Scottish Exhibition and Conference Center. 3,000 fans was reported capacity, or the reported attendance rather. The capacity was between apparently 5,000 and 10,000. Now, the World Wrestling All-Stars had gone through quite a few changes. At the time that it started in October of 2001, they did a tour, they did their first pay-per-view, and then they did their second pay-per-view in February 2002, and then they did their third pay-per-view in April of 2002. Okay, things were not necessarily cooking, but they were doing fine. They were drawing in some pretty good markets and doing well in Melbourne, Australia. It kind of makes sense since the guy that was funding the thing, the promoter, Andrew McManus, who was a concert promoter, had decided, hey, I want to have a wrestling tour. Okay, let's bring in some people. WCW went out of business. ECW went out of business. But from the April 2002 pay-per-view that I reviewed to now, and this was nearly 8 months later, a lot can change in 8 months. Scott Steiner was a world champion coming out of the April pay-per-view, had vacated the championship because he went to WWE. To have that very, very, very famous feud with Triple H, my God, make it stop. Make it stop. Ow. That pay-per-view was really, those pay-per-view matches were just, God, they were brutal. Absolutely fucking brutal. It's pretty bad when No Way Out 2003 was actually the better of the two, and it was still really goddamn bullshit. Sid Vicious, Psycho Sid, whatever you want to say, he was no longer the commissioner. Above average Mike Sanders from the last year and a half of WCW, the guy that led the Natural Born Thrillers and had a feud with Ernest Miller that seemed to last for about 15 fucking years, was the new commissioner. I'm going to surprise you guys by saying that one of the matches on this show that ended up probably being the best thing was Joe E. Legend, Just Joe from his brief stint in WWE, and above average Mike Sanders having a match. That was actually probably the best goddamn thing on this show, as far as crowd reception and the fact that it was well worked. This also was a short pay-per-view. It was under 2 goddamn hours, and it was the second to last WWA pay-per-view. They wouldn't have another one until about 5.5 months later, May 25th, 2003, I believe, and that was it. They would fold soon afterwards, and with more of the stuff that kept happening, between April of 2002 and now, NWA TNA had started. They were doing their weekly pay-per-view stuff and everything, and they were giving people a platform in the States to apply their trade. More of the independents were popping up and everything, getting a little bit of buzz. I believe Ring of Honor started in June of 2002. May or June of 2002. I don't remember the exact timeline. But even though they were working out of very, very small venues, they were getting some buzz. And they were going to start getting proper DVD distribution and gain a cult following and everything. And then eventually grow and grow and grow. And now who knows what's going to happen with Ring of Honor. The whole point is there were other promotions in the States popping up that even if they were just starting to bubble up, you didn't have to wonder if you could get, you could get into Australia or get into the UK, even though, some of these talents could travel to those places easily. You could work in the States, and there were problems here. Like, even though there were a couple decently consistent storylines on this pay-per-view alone, some of the matches were a fucking mess. A couple of them weren't that bad. There was a little life here, but you could also sense that the wheels were coming off, and this was soon just going to be something that was just going to crash into a goddamn wall. Since it was the second to last pay-per-view, it's not really shocking. So yeah, Glasgow, Scotland. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. I really am. Glasgow, Glasgow. Some people pronounce it differently. Glasgow, since it's got a G there. If I'm mispronouncing, I apologize to any Scottish fans that are watching. So, yeah. The Borash and Disco Inferno on commentary, which is pretty much cementing the fact that when Jeremy Borash is, again, your best commentator, you're in trouble. So, Andrew McManus is talking to Mike Sanders, hey, do what you need to do and make this show run good. The sad thing is Mike Sanders is actually tolerable here, which is making me think either I just got to where I, could deal with his stuff in the last year of WCW and just got so beat down by it that it just got to the point where I just accepted he was going to be part of the show. And now, sometime after him not having to endure him on WCW programming and him not really being featured in WWE, he was signed there for right after I think WCW went under, and he was there for what, like 18 months, maybe a little bit less, and I don't remember him appearing except maybe once or twice on Heat. So anyway, we get a bagpipe parade, and Borash does the introductions and everything. Welcomes everybody to the Retribution, not the group that calls themselves Retribution. Should have said that for the intro. So Disco Inferno comes out to booze, thankfully, because Disco Inferno sucks. Shark Boy against Frankie Kazarian. Before he was, you guessed it, Frankie Kazarian, he was the future Frankie Kazarian, with the long hair and everything. This was fine. Shark Boy did his usual antics and everything. Kazarian was a clear heel, did some good heel work, and eventually Dead Sea Drop 1, 2, 3. It's about 10 minutes, fine action, fine opener. Nothing offensive, just nothing that really stood out to me. And at least at this point, this was before Shark Boy said, "Give me a shell, yeah." He did a really good impression of Stone Cold Steve Austin. I just don't understand why they built all those all those sets for him. I don't fucking get it. Here's Mike Sanders to address the crowd and what he'll do. Hypes up the card. It's going to be Luger versus Sting for the vacant WWA Heavyweight Championship. 2002 Lex Luger, and just a few months before he would lead to the demise of Miss Elizabeth, and I will never forgive Lex Luger for that, among other things, but especially that. So yeah, he took on Sting. It's going to be his first televised pay-per-view appearance in a while. I think since the last episode of Nitro. Because he didn't go to WWE, he just sat home on his contract and everything. His AOL Time Warner contract, could you really blame him? Couldn't blame anybody for taking a year, 18 months, whatever the fuck it was, and just collecting that cash. Because AOL, Time Warner, they were stupid enough to sign those contracts. So they're like, no, fuck it. We're going to sit out the invasion angle, and we're going to collect our cash. So then Joey Legend, a.k.a. Just Joe from WWE, shows up and interrupts him. He keeps saying, no, and he keeps doing this stuff and everything. And look, this would have been fine if it would have been about 90 seconds, 2 minutes. This felt like it went on for about 10. This is on pay-per-view. Whether it was, I think it was 1995, they were charging people. So, okay, fine. You're charging people only $20. It's less than WWE. And TNA was charging $9.95 per week, so that was averaging out to about $40 a month. Fine. You hadn't had a pay-per-view in a bit. You're trying to hook people. You're trying to justify your pay-per-view price, and you're having this promo segment between two guys. And yes, I praise the match. I'm going to praise the match here in a bit. Two guys that were viewed as basically enhancement talents in their respective companies. Just Joe was just a guy that stirred shit backstage and said, oh, I'm Just Joe. Who are you? I'm Just Joe. It was a gag that was, I think it had maybe a 2-week shelf life. Nothing against the guy. The guy actually seems like a fine worker and actually did some good stuff a little bit later on. But just how the presentation was, okay, he had longer hair. It looked like he'd worked out a little bit more. Mike Sanders was presented as a goddamn goof and an idiot as the commissioner and everything, and kind of a dick, thinking that he was bigger than he ever was. But he's a babyface here, and it just this went forever. This should have not gone on as long as it did. They should have added a couple more minutes to a match, like maybe the next one, because we're supposed to have Conan versus Nate Spiderweb, Spider with a Y, so it's Zed. Is that how it's said? Man, that's really goddamn old. So, Saturn shows up and attacks Webb, hits him with the DVD, the Rings of Saturn, that kind of stuff, lays him out. Conan is not out there, by the way. Why is Saturn out here? Saturn? What the hell? He was part of WWE for a while, and I think had been released a little bit before that, sometime before that. I don't necessarily blame him, the whole moppy thing and whatever. But Conan rolls in and pins the guy, 1, 2, 3. The bell rang, and then the bell rang, to quote Roddy Piper about Larry the Axe Hennig. So then he joins commentary. Conan does. I think he only joins it for a little bit, but still, he mocks the match. And I like Conan, but this Conan and Disco Inferno, jaw-jacking and whatever, nah, not necessarily something I need to hear on a pay-per-view after WCW went under. So then we have more midget stuff, because we can't get away from this goddamn midget stuff. I know there are talented midget wrestlers, and maybe these guys are nice. This was a feud that just didn't need to goddamn happen. We have this Tio and Puppet psycho dwarf guy or whatever, and they're trying to, get Medeja's affections and whatever. Nobody cares about any of this stuff. Medeja, the former, main freak of Scott Steiner, who had gone to WWE, Now, she signed to a contract and is just being passed around like a joy at a college party. No, really, that's what they fucking did to her here. And in other segments. Great way to respect women. Great way. Man, women's wrestling has really come a long goddamn way, hasn't it? So Sanders interrupts and says, hey, Medeja, you're going to be the referee for their match. I've never refereed. And she shouts that a few times as if the camera didn't pick it up. I don't know who put these segments together. I don't care. Buff Bagwell and Johnny Swinger took on Norman Smiley and Malice, a.k.a. The Wall, from the last year at WCW. He was also Sergeant AWOL. And look, Malice, unfortunately, would pass away about a year after this. I think a year to the day of this pay-per-view, at least when the pay-per-view was, record or, shown live or, like filmed in front of the crowd. They actually didn't, they aired on tape delay like 2 months later, which probably should give you a clear indication of just what the state of the WWA was at that point. The heels jumpstart. Malice had lost quite a bit of weight as well. He wasn't that he was fat. It's just he trimmed down, and unfortunately, I forget exactly what led to his issues. I think it was a heart issue or something. It really didn't. I think he was only like 41 when he passed. Norman Smiley gets beat up a bit. We do get the big wiggle at one point, but even though Malice tries to clean house, Norman Smiley gets pinned by the Buff Blockbuster, and Swinger covers 1, 2, 3. This is a 10-minute match that probably should have been cut down by a few minutes. They really should have added a 9th match to this because it was a less than 2-hour, pay-per-view broadcast. Don't tell me that there couldn't have been other talents they could have brought out. They could have brought out some local Scottish talents and had them face off against some other people that they had to have backstage. Maybe I don't know. It just seemed like this pay-per-view, any good stuff was immediately like undercut by, matches went too long or were just badly booked. And then Tio and Puppet, the Psycho Dwarf thing, whatever. Hardcore match with no hardcore stuff. Medeja as a ref. Same as it ever was. And as the days go by, Tio gets a win. And then Saturn beats up the midgets, which was about the only good part of this whole thing. And then grabs the mic and says he's here to kick ass and take names. Actually, he's here to take names or kick names and take ass. He's actually here to take ass, and he basically forces Medeja to be his valet. Forcing a woman to do your bidding. My God. I mean, I know that I'm not saying Saturn was like that, but the implication, some stuff hasn't aged all that well. Also, Medeja, again, being passed around like a joy at a college party. So anyway, above average Mike Sanders, or just Mike Sanders at this point, I guess, against Joey Legend, and the crowd was shockingly into this. And again, probably the best match on the goddamn card as far as a clear heel, a clear face, and the work. Joey Legend showed some good agility. Mike Sanders fought from underneath. There was some good stuff. The crowd was booing Legend. They were, cheering Mike Sanders as he kept fighting back. I would say that out of all the matches, this was probably the one that you could watch and be like, okay, it didn't go too long. And I think it was like 9 minutes, and the timing of it actually was just fine. He hits the super kick, Sanders does, gets the victory. Takes the mic and says, hey, Saturn will be added to the upcoming Sabu Simon Diamond match. Oh boy. So Bald Scott D'Amore interviews Lex Luger, who was never good at promos. His shirt was too tight, Billy. And his friendship with Sting and staying at home, collecting his money, traveling up and down the road with Sting, and they're going to have a good, clean match. Or are they? They're not going to have a good, clean match, by the way. And then Scott D'Amore tries to get a word with Saturn and Medeja. Medeja just says, help me. Again, implying she's being taken against her will. Jeff Jarrett took on Nathan Jones for the NWA title for the first time ever, and oh dear. Whoo! My goodness. Nathan Jones had a great look. He was never cut out for wrestling, and Jeff Jarrett broke more guitars, still didn't draw a dime, and got the victory in about 5.5 minutes. That's really where we were here. Jeff Jarrett was the NWA champion because I think he had won it from R-Truth, if I'm right. Because Shamrock was the first NWA TNA era champion. Truth beat him. We're on the Truth Killings. And then Jarrett had beaten him in November? Earlier, mid-November of 2002. And then decided to defend the championship over here because, well, the WWA needed more championships, and they needed to try to draw a crowd. They drew whole 3,000 people in Scotland. Now, don't get me wrong, the crowd was loud for some of this stuff. They were booing, they were cheering. there were points where they had indifference towards some stuff, which typical wrestling crowd. But don't tell me this was a good idea to take it over to Scotland, not draw a bigger crowd, because I can imagine that they did not make any money off of this. I can't imagine that they did, because the travel and the bringing the production stuff over the rings, the talents, all that stuff. Even some of these guys that might have come for like a decent rate, I cannot imagine that this was sustainable. Had they just run in Australia and maybe done like a UK tour, but then mainly toured Australia and maybe New Zealand, they might have been able to do something. I'm not saying it was sustainable for the reasons I mentioned earlier about NWA, TNA, and Ring of Honor and that kind of stuff, but the October 2001 to May of 2003, when their last pay-per-view was basically, I believe, their last show. I don't think they had another show. They just said, no, we're shutting this down. Stop. Don't do this anymore. So anyway, yeah, the match was shit, as you would expect. It was short, but it was still shit. So Jones pops up, by the way, afterwards, after taking a guitar shot, and fist bumps the fans and is thanking them and everything. And I think this is Nathan Jones's last... He might have appeared at the May 2003 pay-per-view. I looked at the card, but didn't necessarily retain it. And Disco does the ring announcing for the next match, because this pay-per-view wasn't enough of a mess, and we need to hear Disco Inferno talk more? No, we fucking didn't. Simon Diamond mentions that Sabu is homicidal. Hey, I'm heterocidal. If anybody gets that MST3K reference, tell me what episode. Love you guys. So anyway, he doesn't care for hardcore wrestling. Simon Diamond, Sabu, and Perry Saturn, or just Saturn here, took on each other in an anything goes, no DQ hardcore match. This is 17 minutes, and much like what I said about Sabu and Devon Storm at the February and the April 2002 pay-per-views, it did not need to go 17 to 20 pissing minutes. 10 minutes. Seriously. Add another match. This match did not need to go as long as it was. Or as long as it did, rather. There were times where there was some good stuff, some good psychology. Saturn, considering the storyline they'd had with him, he had Medeja in his corner against her will. He beating up the puppets, beating up the midgets. There was ECW chance, as you would expect, because Scotland's a pretty passionate crowd. We get a chair dive outside. Well, Sabu jumps off the chair, jumps off the ropes, does the thing. We get blood, from, I believe, Saturn and Sabu. I don't remember if Simon Diamond bled. I will say also, if you watch any of these WWA pay-per-views, like they're from the master tapes and are not the best quality, you get the gist of the idea, and you get most of... You get pretty much as good a quality as you're going to get, considering they're, again, from old pay-per-view master tapes, but some of it's a little bit grainy. I do want to thank the people for uploading shows like this, though, and shows like the old Crockett stuff, and Georgia Championship, Georgia Championship Wrestling, and the like. So, eventually, the midgets show up after there's some more table bumps, and they beat up Saturn, and then they strip Medeja, and that angers Saturn, to the point that even though her titties are popping out, he covers her with somebody's jacket, I don't know, and takes her to the back. And then Sabu and Simon Diamond have more of a match, and then Sabu wins with a moonsault. No, seriously, that's actually what happened. Great way. They started using Saturn just fine. He beat up that one guy, he came out and beat up the midgets later, and then he just leaves the match. Like, creative had no goddamn idea what they were fucking doing. Sting interview. He's talking about his first match in nearly 2 years. Seriously, it was just over 18 months at this point. And traveling with Luger. And other stuff and everything. And Luger makes his entrance, and man, he looked washed. And boy, when the bell rang, you could definitely tell he was washed. Sting gets a massive pop because he's Sting. He's the icon, Sting. I always wanted him to come out with Akon so we could have the Akon and the icon. I cannot imagine that anybody will understand that reference. Sting versus Luger, vacant WWA title match, and fucking hell, this was abysmal. If you thought Luger didn't look motivated in the main event of Super Brawl 2 when he was going to sit out the rest of his WCW contract right after, and I retro-reviewed that, you could check that out. My goodness, just about 10 and a half years later, almost 11 years later, actually, this was stupid. Luger was at one point just bumping, shouting like he was getting shot every goddamn time. Like pain was shooting down his legs. Not anymore. Karma bit you, didn't it? You son of a bitch. And Luger basically had to be carried by Sting. Sting once again helping Luger out and carrying him. At least he seemed motivated. Sting, that is. Luger cuts a promo during the match. This is during the match. And he calls Sting a cheater in Glasgow, England. And then he says, and then Sting says, I'm going to give you a Glasgow kiss, which is a headbutt, by the way. Give us a kiss! No Samoa Joe here. More in the pity. Because Samoa Joe was really just getting started in his career a couple years into his career, and he wasn't an announcer yet. I'm now championing for Samoa Joe to do ring announcing, or not ring announcing, but announcing for some company. I don't care. Just have him do it for a goddamn independent. I don't care. Have him do it for AEW, and maybe have him replace Chris Jericho on commentary. Let's get back to this show. It was shit. Jarrett shows up later, hits Sting. Luger gets a 2 count. We get a ref bump out of the torture rack. And then Sting has the win after the Scorpion Death Drop. Another guitar to the head, still not drawing a dime. And Sting loses, to huge, thunderous boos. My goodness. Stupid. Fucking stupid. You know what? I'm glad this company, this brand, this touring brand went out of business with shit like this. Because of all the reasons I meant. This was really, really bad. And unfortunately, from what I remember about reading, for their last pay-per-view, it didn't get much better. It couldn't have gotten any worse, though. Agree, disagree with what I said? Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.